The following is a broadcast of North Burlington Baptist Church.
You know what I love about our church? Like, one of the many things I love about our church. I love the fact that we're not perfect yet. You know, so we can have a video that doesn't work, and it's funny, you know, because we're human. I think that's what makes our church so good, is that we're so human. So we can ask that, you know, the booklets for CBM get passed out, and then in the confusion of the video working, the booklets didn't get passed out. So I can invite you to pick one up on the way out, and I know you'll do that, so I won't even draw that to that. We can ask, you know, what's the population of China, and we won't know. But thankfully, there is technology, and at the back of the room, it's 1.4 billion. But I love that our church isn't perfect, and we don't pretend to be perfect. It's a place for broken people. I hope that's why you're here. And there was something else I was going to say, but I've forgotten. So I just proved my point over and over, don't I? So last week, it's actually a good segue to what I'm about to say. Last week we began a series called Servant Discipleship. And if you remember, I said I encourage you to consider getting a copy of this book that we're going to make available to you called Discipleship as another way of engaging this series. And we're hoping that many of you will pick it up and read it and just have an opportunity to really allow this whole concept of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus to sink into your soul. And we're also hoping that those who are in growth groups will have a conversation among themselves and say, is this something that we can look at? And maybe between now and the end of Advent or before Christmas, you can use this book as a study guide. So finish off the one you're doing and then maybe make this one the next one. And I know that some of you aren't in a growth group, and you say, well, I wouldn't mind doing that for this series. And so if you're interested, if you'd use a communication card, we'll put you into a group, and they'll meet 9 times to study this book. And that would be, I think, a great way for you to get a taste of growth groups without a long-term commitment necessarily, and also a further way to engage what we're doing in this series. Now, I told you that we didn't have those books available last week, but I'd have them for this week. And then I went to find them, and the one source I knew that had them had 5. And so I have been busily looking for these books. I have now got a case of 50 that will be here next week. So, because we're not a perfect church, this is all good news. We're fine with this, and I know that you don't mind. So, next week we'll have them on sale. If you want to pre-order, I don't know the cost yet. It's a kind of a faith thing here. Around $10 probably, or, you know, give or take. You can use a communication card, and then that way we'll provide one in your mail slot when we get them, if you want to get a jump start on that. Now, over the course of this series, we've been looking at questions that are posed in the Bible that need to be answered by those who want to be followers of Jesus or disciples of His. And last week, we looked at the first question that was ever asked of humanity by God. And it was the question, where are you? And Adam's answer to that question of where are you was, I'm afraid. Because God wasn't asking a geographical question. He was asking a psychological question. Where was he emotionally? Where was his mind at? Where was he mentally? Where was he relationally relative to God? And it's only when that question can be answered that we are then able to begin a journey that will take us from where we are to where God wants us to be, because any spiritual journey, in fact, any journey, has to start with an accurate starting point. And it wasn't that God didn't know where Adam was. It was that Adam didn't know where Adam was, and he needed to grapple with this very profound question, where was he? And I suggested that we need to grapple with this question too. Where are you in relationship to God? And one of the challenges when addressing this question is that we have to penetrate the barrier of our own self-deception, because we often don't like to admit where we truly are with God. I don't know if you've been following the news report of the legendary and now infamous, disgraced Penn State football coach Jerry Sandusky. He was convicted of 45 counts of child sex abuse, sentenced to over 30 years in prison. And after his conviction and prior to his being sentenced, he went on air and he said that he was the victim of a conspiracy. And that the case was based on false allegations. And he said this, "In my heart, I know I did not do these alleged disgusting acts." The Fox News reporter who was anchoring the story asked the question if Jerry Sandusky is delusional. You see, the reality is we are experts in self-deception. And we can truly believe something which is not the case. That's why it's important that we can honestly answer and admit to ourselves where we are. Otherwise, we can never move in the direction to where God's will for our lives will take us. And so last week we looked at that question. Where are you? What are you trying to hide from God? What is it that you want to keep hidden from God? Well, this week we're going to ask another question. It's a question that Jesus asked. You know, Jesus was a master at asking questions. As I was preparing for this sermon, I came across a couple of quotes. One by the French philosopher Voltaire, who said, "Judge a man by his questions rather than by his answers." And then a second was another famous French guy, an anthropologist of the last century, Claude Lévi-Strauss, who said, "The scientist is not a person who gives the right answer. He's the one who asks the right question." And if we place these two statements side by side, then I think it would be accurate to say that if we were to judge Jesus by the questions he asked, we might very well conclude that he was a preeminent scientist of the soul, a master psychologist who knows the heart of people better than people know their own heart. And so today we're going to look at a question that he asked, and like many of Jesus' questions, it's more profound than it appears at first. We think it's just an easy answer, and then the more we think about it, the more we realize this is not an easy question to answer. And it's a question that each of us needs to answer if we desire to be true disciples and followers of Jesus. The question is found in the book of John, chapter 5. Let me read the story for you. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now, there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of people, disabled people, used to lie: the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" Do you want to get well? You see, on the heels of last week's question, coming to grips with admitting where we are, comes a second question. Now that you know where you are, do you want to get well? At first, the question seems absurd. Why wouldn't someone who is not well not want to get well? But of course, wellness is not simply a physical trait. The reality is that each person is in some ways broken. All of us are in need of healing. And so the question really is for all of us. I think we can understand the question better if we reframe it a little bit. So let me ask the same question in a few different ways. Do you really want things to change? Are you ready to leave behind your excuses? Are you prepared to accept responsibility that will come when you're made well? Are you willing to pay the cost and do what it takes? Do you really want to get well? You see, the first issue that we need to sort out is one of desire. Do you really want to be healed of your disease? Are you sure you want to gain control of your volatile, destructive anger? Are you prepared to do whatever it takes to be set free from your addictions, to shopping, to eating, to pornography, to video games, to gossip, to judgmentalism, to alcohol, to laziness, to work, to television, to cutting, to sleep, or whatever else you run to self-medicate when you feel overwhelmed by life? Do you really want to be made well from that? Is that your desire? will you allow Jesus to be your default support that you're going to run to? Do you really want your marriage to improve? Do you really want to move beyond your fears, your anxiety, your guilt, your shame, your regret, your self-pity? You see, friends, sometimes, even though we're in an unhealthy place spiritually, there is this perverse sort of comfort that we feel because it's familiar. And we would rather remain with what's familiar, even though it's self-destructive, than to take the risk that comes with choosing a change, to be made well. And so when push comes to shove, we settle because we don't really want to be made well. And God will not make an imposition upon your will at that point. Friends, what is your desire? Do you want to get well? Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. The invalid's answer reveals his decision to Jesus' question. Once he's grappled with his desire, he makes a decision. And for this man, the decision was yes. I want to be healed. Now, he doesn't know how he's going to be healed. He thinks he knows how he might be healed. Perhaps he thinks that Jesus is going to stand with him, and then when the water gets unsettled, he's going to take the man and put him in the water to get healed. But Jesus doesn't always heal us the way we expect, does he? But regardless of how it happens, he's made the decision. He wants to be healed. You see, friends, it's one thing to desire something. It is completely another to decide. You may desire to go on a cruise in 3 years. That desire, no matter how strong, will not get you on a cruise. At some point, you have to decide if you're going to go on the cruise. You may desire to stop yelling at your children when you're angry. But at some point, you decide, I'm going to stop yelling at my children when I'm angry. You may desire to lose weight. But at some point, you decide, today it starts. Today, I make decisions and choices that are going to help me to lose weight. You may desire to quit some habit or to pursue some virtue or make right some wrong, but desire is not enough. At some point, you have to decide. You have to decide. Now, in North American Christianity, it seems that we have focused upon the initial decision, that event in time when we encourage people to make a choice to become a follower in Christ, to become a Christian. But the unintended message that we sometimes end up sending is that once you've made the decisions, well, that's good enough now. Nothing else matters. You've decided. But the decision in and of itself isn't the end point. You and I both know that just making a decision isn't going to make a dent of change unless that decision leads to an ongoing process, a day-by-day following of Christ. Becoming a follower of Christ starts with a decision, but it's a decision that leads to a process. And it's the same way forward when we want to continue to grow in any area of our Christian walk. There needs to be a decision followed by a process. Do you want to be holy? Do you really? Is that your desire? Do you decide you want to be holy? Then there's a process that will follow. Do you want to become more disciplined? Do you want to be more loving? Do you want to be more patient? Do you want to be a faithful witness? Do you want to know your Bible better? Do you want your prayer life to improve? Do you want to become more compassionate? All of these may be desires, but at some point you make a decision. And then you follow on with a process that walks it out day by day. And just so you're aware, at the end of this sermon, I'm going to be calling you to make a decision. I'll be asking you to decide if there's an area in your life where you want to be made whole, that you want to be made well, where you really desire to be changed. And there may be a cost, but I'm going to ask you at the end of this sermon to decide if you want to be made well. Because every movement forward in your Christian walk starts with a decision. And Jesus came to him and said to him, Get up, pick up your mat and walk. At once, the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. I'm not sure that this was what the man expected. You see, after there is this gut check with regard to your desire, once you have made a decision to begin a process, then comes the work. Then comes the work. Well, you say, I thought Jesus was going to heal me. He is, but not without your cooperation. You see, Jesus was telling him to attempt what he could not do with his own power. But the man found that in the attempt, power was given. So often, Jesus calls us to do something, and we say we can't. He knows you can't. But he calls us to attempt the impossible, believing that he will enable us with his power as we step out in obedience to his command. So let's unpackage this a bit. Let's say you have a desire to restore a relationship that's gone south. And you really desire it, and so you decide, I'm going to begin the process to make this decision right, this relationship right. And you begin to pray about the relationship, and you ask God what you need to do, and you come to the conviction that God really wants you to write a letter of apology. So you begin to write this letter of apology, and as you're writing it, you begin to get so angry. Why should I have to apologize when it wasn't really my fault anyways? And you want to throw up your hands and say, I can't write this letter. And you're right, you can't. But if at that point you quit, before you fully give yourself to the task, you'll never find out what God's power is able to do to make you whole. God meets us in the task, friends, as we begin. So you begin to do what you feel like you can do, simply because you believe that by faith Jesus is going to help you. And you will find that God will give you power. It may not be easy. See, we want it easy. He doesn't say easy. It may not be pleasant, but he will enable you to do what you cannot do on your own strength. But notice that Jesus didn't simply tell the man to walk. He tells him to take up his bed. Why? The famous preacher G. Campbell Morgan puts it this way: in order to make no provision for a relapse. You see, he may be thinking, well, today I'm healed, but tomorrow I might need my bed. I'm going to leave it here so I don't leave my spot in the morning. He says, no, you take that with you. You burn your bridges behind you. When Jesus begins a process of healing you, don't provide any way to be pulled back into it. I don't have to spell out how this works, do I? Get rid of anything that supports your brokenness once Jesus has begun to heal you. So if there's a substance that enables your brokenness, throw out the substance. If there's an unhealthy relationship that's feeding what's unhealthy, end the relationship. If there's a routine that came with the sickness, change the routine. If there's anything that supports being broken and Jesus begins to heal you, take away that thing. Don't give provision for you to slide back to sickness. Now, did you notice the irony of this? For 38 years, this man has been carried on this mat, and now this man is choosing to carry what carried him. But it also means he could no longer be carried. You see, he could no longer ask other people to carry him. He had to walk out now by himself. He had to take responsibility. He could not give excuses for why he could not walk anymore. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It's the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.' So they asked him, 'Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?' The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Friends, you can be sure of this. There's going to be opposition that's going to come once you begin to choose a process of healing. You'll quit a habit, and suddenly there'll be all kinds of free opportunities to re-engage it. I remember when I stopped smoking dope, I got so many offers to smoke free dope. Never get it when I was smoking it. Now that I decided to quit, everybody wants to give me some. You'll reconcile with somebody. You'll do the hard work. And then you'll be in conversation. Up will come a topic that has the potential for conflict. You'll do all this hard, difficult work of healing and wholeness and resisting. And along the way will come this very easy, open opportunity to slip. Opposition to your being well is going to come. Now, not all the opposition you face is going to be external. Let me tell you what I think is going to happen in a few minutes. See, in just a little while, I'm going to ask you to decide if you're willing to be made well. I'm going to ask you to make a decision to begin a process that's going to require work. Work that will be scary and hard and painful. And it can be in regard to any area of your life that you need to be made whole. For some, it may be that you're holding on to bitterness or anger or some other destructive emotion. And today you're going to make a decision that you want to be made well. For some, it may be a decision that says, I'm going to become a Christian. You've been toying with the idea. You've thought about it, but now you're deciding, I want to be a disciple of Jesus. I want my sins forgiven. I want to give him leadership of my life. I'm going to decide to begin to follow Jesus. For others, it may be an area of disobedience that you know Jesus wants of you. It may be that you're resisting being baptized or joining a small group or confessing a sin or tithing, but you know that the Holy Spirit has been speaking to you, and today you're going to decide to change. And I'll tell you what's going to happen. When I ask those of you who are here to make that decision to stand, oh, did I forget to mention that part? Just like the man who is lame had to stand, you'll find that opposition will come from within. See, the man who is full of anger will find himself getting angry. The one who is paralyzed by fear and wants to be free from fear will find themselves paralyzed by fear. The one who knows they're judgmental and critical will begin to become critical and judgmental. And you will begin to have an argument with yourself, trying to talk you out of what you know the Holy Spirit is leading you to do. Some of you are having it now. Don't stand when he says. Don't stand when he says. Opposition will come from within. But Jesus still provides power to those who want to receive it in the face of opposition, to do what you truly desire. So, do you really desire to be well? That's the question Jesus asks of everyone who wants to follow him. Because notice what happens next. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." See, after the test, Jesus shows up. He always does. He always will. He's promised he will never leave us or forsake us. Friends, if you are a disciple of Jesus, he's calling you to follow him along a path that leads to wholeness, to being made well. And you can't follow him if you're going to continue to embrace what's making you sick. Why would somebody who is not well not want to get well? If you're going to follow him, there's a question you need to answer. Do you want to get well? And so now, I'm going to call you to make a decision. Don't wait to see if others respond. This is your decision. It's not on the basis of what others are going to do. If there is an area in your life where you know that God's been prodding, a place of pain maybe that needs to be healed, some place you know is right now it's broken in you, and you're tired of being broken. Things are not well, and you want to be made well. Something that God has been speaking to you about, but you've been resistant. But today you want to choose to surrender. Then today I'm asking you to decide to begin a process that leads to wholeness. If you are making a decision, then just as Jesus said to the lame man, I want to invite you now get up. I think I mentioned we're a church of broken people. Your standing is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of incredible strength. Allow me to pray for you. Lord Jesus, you know why each person stands here with some area of their life that is not surrendered or broken, or which they need to be made well in. And while they stand because it is a sign of a decision, we know that the work now comes. They have to, day by day, work out a process. So I pray that you will give them grace and strength as they make the steps forward that they in themselves can't do. But that you say, if they attempt, you will meet them. Lord, pour out your grace and kindness to them, for we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. You can be seated. Now, for those of you who stood, I want to give you an invitation. You don't have to accept it, but you may. For about 5 minutes after the service, when the band has done the last song, I'm going to be in the boardroom. And I want to talk to you about a program that's going to help you now engage that work, that process that you've now committed to. Because I know what's going to happen when you get home. You won't be able to stand alone unless we create some structure. Because you've tried before. And we want to create a program that's going to provide some structure. It will not be daunting. It will be helpful. And if you have committed to do that and you would like to have that help, if you meet me in the boardroom for 5 minutes, I will explain the program for the process, and I would like to encourage you in that way. Are there any questions about today's sermon? Yes.
You said earlier in the sermon about there's a starting point. Everybody has a starting point.
Yes.
But he says, is it the decision that's the starting point?
The starting point was from last week's when you find out where you are. You start from where you are. And until you can be honest about where you are with God, you can't move forward. If you think you're all, that was a problem with the Pharisees. They thought they were good with God. And as long as you think you're good with God because you're religious, you'll never find your need for God and his forgiveness. Because I'm good. You see? If you think the problem is with everybody else and not with you, then you won't find a solution to the problem because it's not with you. It's everybody else. But it could be that you're self-deceived, you see. And we have this, we're experts at self-deception. And so that's why we did that exercise last week to now with the Holy Spirit to come and penetrate our hearts and ask, where are we? Because he knows where you are. And he can tell you where you are if you want to know. So the starting point is finding out where you are. And then the second question is, now, knowing where you are, do you want to get well? Any other questions? Yes? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a lot of people that will be held accountable, even if not in this life, in the next. A lot of people need healing and are self-deceived. I would suspect those people are self-deceived themselves. I didn't really know. I didn't really see what I thought I saw. We're experts at self-deception. Yeah. Let me pray. Father, today has not been a light sermon, but a much needed one, because we don't want to just play at being Christians. We want to be true Christians. We want to walk with you and know your power. Know your power in our life and be able to extend that power to other people for their lives. So, Lord, as we begin a process of healing in our own lives, would you enable us to continue to move forward without fear, knowing that you will always be with us because you've promised to never leave us. We ask this in your name. Amen. As I was working on this sermon, I had a lot of thoughts going through my head, a lot of things I didn't mention. You know what I find striking is that here was a lame man, touched and healed by Jesus. He never walked the same again, right? He healed. Jacob in the Old Testament was a well man, by all appearances. He was touched by Jesus, and he never walked the same, but he always had a limp after that. You see, your healing may not look like this man's healing. You may walk differently than you walked before, and it may not be the same as you had walked before, because your healing may be different for you than it might be for other people. I'm just telling you. And for some, the man who can't walk, he walks perfectly, and the man who could walk perfectly always walks with a limp, because that's how Jesus chose to heal him. Now, I just need to say this. Some of you feel like you were manipulated. You think, I didn't know we had to go in the back room. You're more worried about going in the back room than you were about standing up. You don't have to go, okay? You don't have to go. Some of you didn't stand up and wish you had stood up and say, now I can't go in the back room. You can still go in the back room, okay? My point's not to manipulate. I just want to help process this stuff with you, provide a way that the healing you long for and that you've decided to commit to can now actually happen. And so let me suggest two directions. One would be through that door to the boardroom. The other would be that way, and you'll pick up a CBM Christmas book, and you'll go out and have coffee, and then the other people will join you later. Some of you, in 15 minutes from now, because you're newcomers to the church, are going to go downstairs to the newcomers' lunch. And others of you who normally meet for lunch because there's a group that are going to meet downstairs somewhere else. I'm not even aware of where that is, but you'll find each other. Just yell. And some of you are going to go home to begin walking out what you've committed to. Does that make sense? So I'm not going to go out this way. I'm going to go out this way. But this week, friends, if you're lame, you might be unable to walk in ways you never knew you could walk if you decide to stand up and trust that Jesus will meet you with power there. You don't have to be afraid, because Jesus had promised he would never, ever leave you or forsake you. He will show up, friends. Are you willing? Have you decided? Go in the grace and the peace of God.
This podcast is a service of North Burlington Baptist Church. If you have any questions or comments, you can email us at info@nbbc.ca. You can also find more information about us at www.nbbc.ca.